Janet exhaled, a cloud of white mist dissipating into the cool night air. Her gym bag slung heavy on her shoulder. The parking lot, usually bustling after the evening workout class, was eerily deserted. She scanned the rows of cars, an unsettling prickle dancing on her skin. Janet quickened her pace, keys clenched between her knuckles. She hated this feeling, this gnawing sensation of being watched, of being followed. It was a familiar ghost, a shadow from her past that refused to be exorcised. The click-clack of her shoes echoed in the silence, each step a drumbeat against her mounting anxiety. Suddenly, a pair of headlights cut through the darkness. A van, its engine idling, blocked her path. Two figures emerged, their features obscured by the harsh glare. Before Janet could react, a hand clamped over her mouth, stifling her scream. The world dissolved into a dizzying blur of movement and panic. Her last conscious thought before darkness swallowed her whole was a chilling certainty. This was no random act. This was personal. Janet's head throbbed in sync with the rhythmic jolting of the van. Her vision swam, the world reduced to a dizzying kaleidoscope of light and shadow. Her wrists and ankles, bound tightly with rough rope, burned with a dull ache. The metallic scent of blood filled her nostrils, a stark counterpoint to the musty odor of stale cigarettes that permeated the enclosed space. Terror, cold and suffocating, coiled like a serpent in the pit of her stomach. She strained against her bonds. Her struggles met with the rasp of rope against skin, and the dull thud of her body against something hard and unforgiving. Desperation clawed at her throat, choking back a sob. Where were they taking her? Who were these people? Questions ricocheted through her mind, amplifying her fear. She strained to hear anything over the rumble of the engine, any clue to her abductors' identities or their motivations. Silence, punctuated only by the rhythmic thump of the tires on asphalt, was her only answer. It was a silence that screamed louder than any confession, a silence pregnant with menace and dread. They dumped her on the cold concrete floor like a broken doll. The back of her head slammed against the hard surface, sending stars exploding across her vision. Disoriented, she blinked, trying to bring the dimly lit room into focus. Two figures loomed over her, their features gradually resolving in the flickering light of a bare bulb hanging precariously from the ceiling. The first was a woman, her face a harsh mask of cruelty. Her lips, painted a garish red, curled into a humorless smile that sent shivers down Janet's spine. The second figure, a man built like a linebacker, remained in the shadows, his face obscured. He radiated an aura of raw, barely restrained violence that made Janet's breath catch in her throat. He spoke, his voice a low growl that reverberated in the confined space. "Well, well, look who we have here," he rasped, taking a menacing step closer. "Welcome to your new home, sweetheart." The woman laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that grated on Janet's nerves. "We've been expecting you," she purred, her voice deceptively sweet. "And trust me, darling, you're going to wish you'd never been born." Days bled into nights, marked only by the meager meals shoved through the slot in the heavy metal door. The air hung thick with despair, the silence broken only by the drip, drip, drip of a leaky faucet, each drop a hammer blow against Janet's frayed nerves. She had long given up hope of reasoning with her captors. The woman who called herself Raven seemed to relish in Janet's terror, her eyes glittering with a perverse amusement. The man, known only as Bear, remained an enigma, his silence more unnerving than any threat. One night, however, a glimmer of hope pierced the oppressive darkness. Shouting voices, laced with panic, filtered through the cracks in the walls. The sounds of a struggle, followed by a heavy thud and a muffled groan, sent a jolt of adrenaline through Janet's weary limbs. Could this be her chance? A reckless hope, fueled by desperation, flared within her. She had to do something, anything, to seize this opportunity. The alternative, a life imprisoned in this concrete tomb, was unthinkable. Whispers in the dark. As the chaos escalated outside, Janet pressed her ear against the cold metal door, straining to decipher the muffled sounds. A frantic whisper, barely audible above the commotion, sent chills down her spine. "The cops! They're here!" The words were like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Hope, once a flickering ember, roared back to life within her, fueled by a surge of adrenaline. This was it. Her one shot at freedom. She rattled the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. Of course, it was locked. She threw her weight against the door, but it didn't give. Despair threatened to overwhelm her. She couldn't let them take her. Not now. Not when freedom was so tantalizingly close. "Help!" she screamed, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Someone please help me!" But her cries were swallowed by the cacophony outside. A desperate plan. Panic welled up inside her, threatening to consume her. "Think, Janet, think!" Her eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for anything at all that could help her escape. Her gaze fell on the loose floorboards she had discovered days earlier, a small act of defiance in the face of her captivity. It wouldn't be easy, but maybe, just maybe. With renewed determination, Janet wedged her fingers under the board and pried. The wood groaned in protest, but it budged. She dug her fingers deeper, ignoring the splinters biting into her flesh. Slowly, painstakingly, she levered the board free. The opening was small, barely wide enough to fit her hand, but it was a start, a glimmer of hope in the suffocating darkness. The escape attempt. The sounds of chaos outside intensified, the muffled shouts and running footsteps drawing closer. Time was running out. Janet worked feverishly, her heart pounding in her chest. With a final desperate heave, she managed to dislodge another floorboard. The opening was still too small to crawl through, but she could see a sliver of light from the other side. Hope surged through her. She took a deep breath and squeezed herself through the narrow opening, ignoring the scrapes and bruises that bloomed on her skin. The space was cramped, dark, and suffocating, but she pushed forward, driven by a primal need for freedom. The floorboards creaked ominously above her, a stark reminder of the danger she was in. But she couldn't stop now, not when she was so close. She emerged into another room, smaller and even more dilapidated than the last. A single window, boarded up from the outside, offered a tantalizing glimpse of the world beyond her prison. Freedom was within reach, but so were her captors. Suddenly, the door to the room burst open. Raven stood silhouetted in the doorway, her face twisted in a mask of rage. Her eyes widened in surprise as she spotted Janet, but the surprise quickly morphed into a chilling grin. "Going somewhere, darling?" she purred, her voice deceptively calm. Janet's heart hammered against her ribs. There was nowhere left to run, nowhere left to hide. She was trapped. In a flash of movement, Raven lunged. Janet instinctively raised her arms to protect herself, bracing for the impact. But it never came. Instead, a crash of splintering wood echoed through the room as Bear slammed into Raven, sending her sprawling across the floor. He grabbed Janet's arm, his grip surprisingly gentle. "Go!" he roared, his voice hoarse with urgency. "Get out of here!" Confusion warred with relief as Janet hesitated, her mind struggling to process the sudden turn of events. Why was he helping her? She didn't have time to question his motives, not now. Trusting her instincts, she allowed him to pull her towards the boarded-up window. He smashed his fist through the flimsy barrier, creating a jagged opening. "Go!" he repeated, shoving her towards the window. "Don't look back!" The night air hit her like a blast of ice and freedom, the scent of damp earth and pine needles filling her lungs. She stumbled, her legs shaky after days of confinement, but she didn't stop. Not until she was far, far away from that house of horrors. She didn't dare look back, but the sounds of the struggle continued to reach her ears, a chaotic symphony of shouts and crashing furniture. What was happening back there? What had driven Bear to betray his partner and help her escape? Questions swirled in her mind, but for now, they could wait. She was free. That was all that mattered. The forest welcomed her into its embrace. the darkness a comforting shroud. With each step forward, the nightmare of her captivity receded, replaced by a fragile hope for a future free from fear. Dawn found Janet miles from the cabin, her body battered and bruised, her clothes torn and dirty. But she had survived. She was free. As she stumbled onto a deserted highway, her thumb outstretched in a desperate plea for help, she couldn't shake the feeling that a part of her would forever remain trapped in that dark and airless room. The memory of her captivity, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of the world, would forever be etched into the fabric of her being. But she would carry on, she would heal, and she would never, ever stop fighting for her freedom. For Janet's ordeal was far from over. The why of her abduction remained a mystery, a shadow looming large over her newfound freedom. And somewhere, out there in the vast expanse of the world, Raven was waiting for her chance to exact her revenge.